Okay, Hubbard is feeling the pressure. Oh, there was also, I think it was 1963, there was an FDA raid on the Washington Church of Scientology because Hubbard had written to the government saying, hey, Scientology can help you guys with your space program and stuff. And various other complaints had been coming to the fore because everywhere Hubbard went, there were complaints that followed. I mean, he was, all these years that he was forming this organization and building this thing up, all the characteristics, and I really should have noted this, all the characteristics of a destructive cult were being developed during this time. So, you know, the idea of shunning and kicking people out and ruining their life, and Hubbard's vindictiveness. I mean, when he set his sights on somebody as an enemy, he would hire private investigators. He would use Scientologists to go persecute that person, what we now call fair gaming. But it hadn't even been that formalized of a thing that it had a name yet. It was just Hubbard having revenge on people. And he'd have people beaten up, and he'd have people followed, and intimidation tactics and stuff like that, because he didn't want people bad-mouthing him or his work. That was his trigger. If you bad-mouthed him or his work in a public way, you were public enemy number one as far as he was concerned. And he would set loose his dogs on you. And this is also shown in The Master, right? Very accurately as to how it was kind of done. So that was all going on during this time. So, okay, so he ends up in England, develops the Bridge to Total Freedom, lays this whole thing out. And he then is looking at the FDA raid, and he tried to get some positive media. You know, the picture that you might see around, some of you might have seen, of Hubbard with the tomatoes. And he's got his meter and he's got it plugged into these tomatoes, or he's got these gloves on and he's doing things with plants and stuff. This is at St. Hill, and Hubbard was trying to put himself out in the public as a legitimate scientist and researcher who was researching the nature of life itself. And he was putting out the idea that plant life was really no different from human life, in that the nature of life itself being this theta component. And he was trying to present himself and sell himself as a legitimate philanthropist and researcher, which of course nobody was particularly buying because Scientology was crazy. But that's what he was doing. So that failed. And that also hit Hubbard hard. In fact, there was one particular article, and I cannot right now remember which publication it was, but it was something Hubbard really invested in. I think it was 1964, 65, that he really, really wanted this article to be this positive media press about him and his work. And he thought it was going to be this wonderful, glowing article. And instead, they totally panned him. And he was furious. I mean, beside himself with fury that he had been so betrayed by the media. And he had always been kind of down on the media, but now he really went to town. I mean, really. And he started developing conspiracy theories. And he then decided that St. Hill wasn't a safe enough place for Scientology. And they needed to kind of own their own country. They needed to own their own place, their own operation. And this is, this is, of course, parallel with the Mormons. It's also parallel with Jim Jones, taking off out of the United States and taking his folks, his 900 followers with him, is to a place where they had total environmental control. They didn't have to abide by the laws of the land. They didn't have to listen to anybody else telling them what to do. They didn't have to pay taxes. That's what Hubbard wanted. So he went down to Rhodesia in Africa, and he tried to infiltrate or get himself ingratiated with the government down there and set himself up as this philanthropic, philanthropic American. He had tons of money at this point. I mean, he had been rolling in it because Scientology is now an international movement. It's truly international in scope. It's not millions of members. It's never been millions of members. Okay. So again, it's small. It's not a big organization. There's tens of thousands, maybe 100,000 people at its peak in the 70s or early 80s. But it's not huge, and they're always misrepresenting their numbers. But it's big enough and international in scope enough that Hubbard's making bank. And he goes down to Rhodesia, and he literally writes them, he suggests a constitution that he writes for the country, and he sends it to the government, and that's his announcement there. He's like, hey guys, I'm here, and here's a new idea for you. And there was all this tumultuous activity and political activity, and apartheid was still reigning in South Africa. And so he goes down there and makes a total mess of it, because again, he didn't have his wife with him, by the way, and he's again has no real solid organizational sense even after all these years. So he fails and he gets kicked out. They don't renew his visa. They know, no, dude, we don't want to have anything to do with you. We see what you're doing. Get the hell out of the country, right? And they had enough good sense to kick him out. There's another backstory there, by the way, which you might find humorous. And this is not according to Hubbard's own writings that I know of, but I've been told by reliable sources who were hooked up at the time, that Hubbard had the idea that he was Cecil Rhodes in a past life.
Oh, wow.
And he thought he was going to go down there and dig up hidden treasure that had been buried down there. And of course, they never found any. But he tried to set up a little hotel deal, and he tried to set up some business stuff down there, and it all just kind of fell apart after he got kicked out of the country. And he came back to St. Hill, and of course, he got a hero's welcome at St. Hill because they all loved him there. And but he decides after that, okay, there is no place we can go on land in this world where we can be safe from authority and laws and this oversight and these people interfering in what we're trying to do in our mission to salvage mankind.